Evaluating the Word document layout. The first step in preparing a document to create an accessible PDF form is to evaluate the original Word document to determine how it's built, how we want the content to be tagged, and how to avoid unnecessary challenges further along in the process. Users often build documents in a way that makes their intended results seem easy, but can create complications when trying to make that document accessible. So let's take a look at a sample SBCTC document and evaluate it to identify potential issues and how to deal with those problems. Here we have an example Word document that is from the SBCTC, and this is a typical Word document that you're likely to see as you're preparing a fillable PDF form. Now, there's a couple of things that I want to do here. Right now, I am showing this form using my hidden characters. So you can see that we could see the return characters and the spaces and things. And for now, I'm going to turn those off just so I can evaluate the form in its raw state. Now, what you're going to notice here, in the upper right-hand corner, there is a print form button and a reset form button that obviously is used when the user wants to be able to print the form or reset the form and start over. And there's not a problem with that. However, having this button in Word isn't really beneficial in the context of creating the final fillable PDF form because these buttons are going to be non-functional. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete these buttons because we're going to utilize the button feature in Acrobat to make the button appear. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And there's a couple elements here that I have to click on to get rid of. And we'll finally get rid of all of these elements. I'm going to do the same thing here to the reset form button. And I'll just get rid of all these components. And there we go. Now, as we move down in this form, the other thing that I want to point out that may not be apparent initially is that each section of the form has been created using a table, okay? So basically, we have all of these cells are components of an overall table. So we have a table here, we have one down here, and we have one here, and of course we have one here. Right? Now, what is the problem in putting your content in a table? Well, fundamentally, you're never going to hear me say that you can't put fillable form fields in a table. You actually can. However, the way that this particular form was built, it wasn't built in a way to facilitate easy navigation of the document. You'll notice here in this form, in this table up here at the top, we have one row that has 3 cells in it. We have another row that has 2 cells in it. And then we have some rows that only have 1 cell. Now what this does is it creates an inconsistent user experience, right? And so as a user is navigating the table, how do they know when they're in a row that has 3 cells versus 2 versus 1? It's going to be a trial and error for them, and it's not going to be a good user experience. So for that reason, what we're going to do is we're basically going to perform a task called linearizing these tables. And what that means is we're going to basically pull the content out of the table and literally just read the individual components of the table without it being structured as a table. And this is a very common thing that we do because to rebuild this form without the tables is going to be quite a challenge, right? So whoever built this form wanted the visual look of these table cells, but from an accessibility standpoint, that is not going to be a good user experience. So we have to find a happy medium between having the visual look of the table and the navigation from a user using assistive technology. So there's nothing we can do about that right now, but we do want to remember it moving forward so that we can address it later on in the process. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you is you'll notice as we get further down in this form, we have some areas where we're asking the user a question. So for example, here we have employee status, and the choices are either they're a permanent employee or a non-permanent temporary employee, okay? Now what the users did here is they put a box to represent the form that is eventually going to go into the final fillable form. Now, the problem with having a visual element in here right now is the fact that when we add the form field, we need to make sure that it lines up perfectly with the element that we have in the document currently. And that can be a bit challenging. So what I like to do is remove those, and we're going to let the form field itself represent the visual component of this element. Now, the other variable here is that the user put boxes here to represent the choice of the form. Now, this is a really good time to talk about the difference between a checkbox and a radio button, because honestly, at this area right here, these should be radio buttons. And the default appearance of a radio button is that it's round, not square. Now, we can make a radio button look square. However, from standard form practices, radio buttons are always round and checkboxes are typically square. And that's how a user knows what type of form field they could potentially be using. Now, the difference between a checkbox and a radio button is that a radio button is mutually exclusive, which means with radio buttons, there's only one possible choice of the options. With a checkbox, there could be multiple choices that the user could choose. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete these boxes, and they've made it easy for me. Sometimes it may not be quite as easy. As I remove these, you can see that the text is shifting a little bit. So, we could either set a tab, or I could cheat a little bit and just add some spaces to bump it over. I'm going to go ahead and delete that guy, and then we'll just kind of give it a little bit more breathing room there. And then I'll delete this one. Again, just give it a little more room. And here we'll delete that. And I think that one's okay. And then down here, we have two others that I'm going to remove as well. Again, just give it a little bit more breathing room there. And that puts our form in a pretty good spot to proceed to the next step. But keep in mind that now is a time when you want to make adjustments to the layout to simplify the process moving forward. By making the changes we've made, it'll be easier for us to properly structure our form content and add the appropriate form fields when we get to that step. Keep in mind, we're not completely free of the work that needs to be done, but we've made the process simpler and easier as we proceed.